So I think it's good we start with Surah Al-Fatiha. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين ولعن الله ولا أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين آمين يا رب العالمين. أما بعد. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. So this is the ninth part of our series discussing supplications or dua, the supplicant and the etiquette of supplicating. As with other series of discussions that we have had, I always strongly recommend that the previous parts are studied before continuing with this one. This is so that we can avoid any confusion, misunderstanding, unwarranted assumptions, and such within the subject matter. The nature of the subject matter, the style of discussion really does require that each part build upon the one that came before. So again, it's very strongly recommended that anyone consuming this, please go and look through the previous parts, even at a very high level. Nevertheless, we will have a recap, so if I can get a salawat, we can have the recap. So in the previous session, we turned our gaze towards one of the most profound outcomes of supplication, intimacy with God. A closeness that is not defined by space, but by presence, by sincerity, and by love. We explored the meanings of qurb, which is closeness, and uns, which is intimate familiarity. We drew upon the Quran and the munajat, whispered prayers of al-Bayt, and the insights of scholars and Urafa, mystics. And this was not a theoretical exercise. It was an invitation to taste the sweetness of nearness, to understand that divine proximity is not reserved for the elect, but is open to every heart that turns sincerely and consistently towards the beloved. We revisited verses such as the one from Surah Al-Baqarah, second chapter of the Quran, the chapter of the cow, verse number 186, which reads, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is saying, when my servants ask you about me, tell them, I am indeed nearmost. I answer the supplicant's call when he calls me. So let them respond to me and let them have faith in me so that they may fare rightly. And we came to see that this is not just a metaphor, rather it's a promise. Through the example of the Prophet and the Imams, especially in Dua Kumail, Dua Arafah of Imam Husayn, Dua Abu Hamza, and the many adiyat in du'as in Sahifa Sajadiyya, we discovered that the true supplication is not merely to ask, but to belong. It is the lover's cry, not the merchant's list. We learnt that God does not grow tired of being asked. On the contrary, the more we ask, the more He draws near, even if our words falter. What matters is the turning of the heart. We saw that ziyarah also becomes an extension of this intimacy, not a detour, but a deepening. To greet the Imams and members of Ahlul-Bayt is to call upon the ones dearest to God, to borrow the language of divine love from those whose hearts have never turned away. And finally, we turn to practice, how intimacy is cultivated, not by perfection, but by sincerity, by repetition, by presence, and by love. We were reminded that every time we whisper to Him, in joy, in sorrow, in longing, or even in silence, we are already drawing near. And so we closed with this truth. Supplication is not merely a means, it is a homecoming, a return to the one who is closer than the jugular vein, a return to the one who never left. In this part, we will, God willing, explore how this sacred act of turning becomes the gateway to contentment, not by changing the external, but by transforming the internal. With His name upon our tongues, we continue. Please give me a salawat.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
So let's now look at supplication as a gateway to contentment. Contentment, or rida, is among the highest stations of the spiritual path. It is not indifference, nor is it the absence of emotion. It is the presence of trust, a deep inner stillness born from knowing that God is wise, loving, and near. The one who does not, the one who is content, does not necessarily have less pain. They simply have fewer illusions. They do not surrender to fate, but rather they surrender to the one who controls fate. In Islamic thought, contentment is not a passive state. It is the fruit of a long cultivation, the end point of a soul that has traversed through fear, hope, love, and certainty until it rests in the embrace of divine decree. As the Quran declares in one of the most amazing and majestic addresses to the human soul, this is from Surah Al-Fajr, the chapter of the dawn, 89th chapter of Quran, verses 27 to verse number 30. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, O tranquil soul, return to your Lord, pleased with Him and pleasing to Him. So enter amongst my servants and enter my garden. This tranquil soul, that is an-nafs al-mutma'inna, is not one untouched by trials, but one that has learnt to turn in every situation. It is the soul that supplicates, not only when desperate, but even when the answer is delayed. It is the soul that has passed from fear to trust, from complaint into communion. In fact, this verse and the idea of nafs al-mutma'inna, the tranquil soul it addresses, is, according to many of the mufassirin, the exegetes, a reference to Imam Husayn. And indeed, according to some accounts, it was a verse that was heard at the point Imam Husayn was being martyred on the day of Ashura. And we can see that Imam Husayn fulfilled the conditions of this verse, in that he was, on that fateful day of Ashura, entirely content and pleased with God's decree, his radiyah, and that his stance, his revolution, was truly pleasing to God, maradiyah, because it was a movement in his direction and to protect his teachings and to ensure that they never withered away due to the corruption and complacency of men. And because he wanted to give that message to all of the population. As we've said, the trial that Imam Husayn had to endure on Ashura was profound. Even when you reflect upon it, it can bring a grown man to tears. But Imam Husayn bore it with contentment, entirely at peace with God's decree. The thought of absconding, of running away, is something that would never come to someone who is in that sublime state of contentment. So how does someone arrive at this state? Through dua, through the discipline of turning again and again until the heart is reshaped by divine presence, of constantly refocusing on God, of understanding His plan and being content with it. It should be noted, as I've said before, this is not on account of either weakness or complacency, nor is it down to being fatalistic. Not at all. Rather, this is built on an understanding that His plan is the most profound and that He, as it is said, is in the arena. As Imam al-Sadiq has said, and this is, again, all of the citations and references are in the write-up, and since the last few sessions, I've given a lot more detail on each of the citations. So Imam al-Sadiq has said, whoever is content with God's decree does not ask him to hasten punishment nor delay blessing. This is the heart of a believer, still in longing, but no longer in panic, yielded, but not defeated, seeking, yet satisfied. Now, as we progress in our journey through Uddat al-Dāʿī by Ibn Fahd al-Hilli, we now come to the fifth benefit of supplication. As we've said, contentment, rida. As we discuss this and try to understand it, we will ask, what is the nature of this contentment? How is it cultivated through dua? What does it mean to be content with a decree that perhaps wounds us? And can the language of request truly give rise to a heart that has stopped demanding? We will explore these questions through the Quran, through the words of the Prophet and the Imams, through the whispers of lovers and the tears of those who surrendered. And we will come to see that dua is not just how we speak to God, but how we learn to accept from Him. And in that acceptance, something shifts. The storm quietens. The heart is no longer obsessed with the outcome. It is in love with the one who writes the story. And in Quran, in Surah Al-Talaq, the chapter of the divorce, 65th chapter of Quran, verse number 3, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, and whoever puts their trust in God, He is sufficient for them. Now let us begin in His name, the most sublime. Please give me a salawat and we continue.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل درجة.
So contentment is the fruit of intimacy. If you recall the previous session, we explored an idea called uns, and this is the warmth of intimacy with God. Now we turn to what blossoms from that intimacy, which is contentment, rida. Not as resignation, but as quiet certitude. A soul that rests in the nearness of its Lord and finds serenity not in outcomes, but in the relationship. True rida, contentment, is not born in isolation. It is the fruit of qurb, yani divine proximity, and uns, spiritual companionship or intimacy. It arises when the heart has turned towards God so often that it no longer fears the unknown, for it has come to know the knower. Imam al-Sadiq beautifully said, and this is from Al-Kafi, whoever is content with the decree of God will not ask him to hasten punishment nor to delay blessing. This is not a call to silence our needs, but to refine our orientation, to move from demanding specific results to embracing divine wisdom, even when it is veiled. The supplicant who persists in dua is not necessarily asking for change in circumstance. They are asking for a change, a transformation in the heart. The Quran affirms this state in the most intimate of addresses. This is from Surah al-Bayyinah, the chapter of the clear proofs, 98th chapter of the Quran, verse number 8. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, their reward near their Lord is the gardens of Eden, with streams running in them, to remain in them forever. God is pleased with them, and they are pleased with Him. That is for those who fear their Lord. This mutual rida, God is pleased with, this is mutual rida. God is pleased with the servant, and the servant is content with God. This is the pinnacle of faith. It is not a state that is reserved for the saints, or for the imams, or for the anbiya. It is cultivated in the life of the one who supplicates in sincerity. There is a very profound narration, Hadith Qudsi, which is, Hadith Qudsi is basically a hadith narrated by Prophet Muhammad or Ahlul-Bayt, but it's something that Allah is saying. It's not part of Quran. It's something Allah is saying that is not inside Quran, that is not directly inside Quran. So in this Hadith Qudsi, Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him and his family, is reported to have said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He said, whoever is not content with my decree and does not show patience in my trials, let him seek a Lord other than me. And this is a universally accepted hadith between the Sunnah and the Shia. The references I have provided in the write-up are across all of the different schools. Now, the language of this is piercing, not because God is rebuking harshly, but because contentment is inseparable from Tawheed. To accept his decree is to affirm his lordship. Dua in this light becomes the school of rida, of contentment, a training of the heart to surrender without resentment. Ibn Fahd al-Hilli in Uddat al-Dāʿī, he writes, among the etiquettes of the supplicant is that he entrusts his affair to God, and he is content with what he decrees for him, and knows that God is more merciful to him than he is to himself, and more knowledgeable of his welfare. For perhaps he asks for something in which lies his destruction, and if the servant knew that, he would ask God to turn it away from him. As God says, man prays for evil the same way he prays for good. And this resonates with the words of Amir al-Mu'mineen, Imam Ali, which we can find in Ghurur al-Hikam. Contentment is the adornment of the believers. Not every request is fulfilled, but every sincere dua is a step closer to rida. The Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him and his family, once supplicated. The Prophet made a dua. And this is quoted in the books of the Sunnah and the Shia. And Rasulullah, his dua was, O God, make me content with your decree, blessed in what you have destined, and loving of all that you ordain. This is the posture of the mature supplicant. They do not cease to ask, they continue to ask, but they also learn to smile through the tears because they trust the one to whom they speak. And it is in this trust, in this intimacy, that the seed of contentment takes root. And from that soil, the soul grows quiet. So now, if you look at supplication and surrender, they're actually two sides of the same coin. Let us study this. Let us understand this. To supplicate is to speak, but to surrender is to listen. Dua, supplication, and taslim, surrender, they might look like opposites, yet they are inseparable. One reaches out in longing, the other leans back in trust. One cries for a door to open, the other sits before that door in reverence, knowing that the one behind it is always near. This is not passive submission, it is active yielding. The one who surrenders is not defeated, they are elevated because they know where to place their burden. The Quran gently teaches, and this is from Surah Al-Baqarah, the chapter of the cow, second chapter of Quran, verse 216. It may be that you dislike something while it is good for you, and it may be that you love something while it is bad for you, and God knows while you do not. The one who persists in dua learns this truth through tears. They ask, they beg, they knock, and sometimes the heavens are silent. But in that silence, something else is born. A heart that no longer prays only to receive, but prays in order to be received. As Imam Zayn al-Abidin says in Dua Abu Hamza, "O my God, I see myself asking you for what I do not deserve. Yet you are worthy of reverence and forgiveness. So grant me what I ask of you, for I am an ignorant servant who does not know what is best for me." This is the voice of taslim, of surrender, blooming within dua. The servant who does not stop asking, but they now ask with awareness. Perhaps what I want is not what I need. The hand remains raised, but the heart is let go. It is this letting go that transforms supplication from a transaction into a transformation. Ibn Fahd al-Hilli, again in Uddat al-Dāʿī, he says, Dua teaches the soul to speak its need, but also to recognize that its need may be elsewhere. The heart that continues to turn to God, even when the answer is delayed, is the heart that has begun to surrender. And this echoes the Hadith Qudsi narrated by Rasulullah that I quoted earlier, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, whoever is not pleased with my decree, nor patient in my trials, let him take a God other than me. The intensity of this statement reveals a very simple truth. To refuse to surrender is to question his lordship. But to supplicate while surrendering is to affirm that every decree is already wrapped in mercy, even if the eye cannot see it. Imam al-Sadiq captures this beautifully. When you supplicate, assume that the response is already beneath your feet. Yani the response has already been given. In other words, your dua is already accepted, but not always in the form you expect. Even among the scholars of later generations, this synthesis is emphasized. For example, Imam Khomeini, Qudus Sharif, may God rest his pure soul, in Adab Salat, the disciplines of prayer, he writes, the seeker must know that the purpose of supplication is not to achieve one's desire, but rather the purpose is to manifest servitude and submission. And if the desire is achieved, it is his grace and mercy. And if it is not, it is his wisdom and expediency. Therefore, the servant must be content with his decree and surrender to his command. This is why the Quran describes the believers as those who hasten to good, not out of fear or greed alone, but with awe and longing. In Surah Al-Anbiya, 21st chapter of the Quran, the chapter of the prophets, verse number 90, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, indeed, they used to hasten towards good deeds and would supplicate us with hope and fear, and they were humbly submissive to us. This is dua with taslim, passionate, honest, and yielding. The voice of such a soul does not fade when the answer delays. It only grows softer, deeper, and more trusting. Because it is not asking to control, it is asking to belong. Please give me a salawat and we'll move to the next bit. So let us now look at the role of supplication in reframing suffering. One of the most profound effects of supplication is its ability to reframe suffering, not to erase it, not to deny it, but to transfigure it. To suffer is to be human, but to suffer with meaning, to walk through pain while still whispering the name of God, this is what elevates the soul. Supplication is the lens through which affliction is reinterpreted, not as abandonment, but as invitation, not as divine silence, but as a deeper call. As Imam Sajjad pleads in Dua Abu Hamza, O my God, had you wanted to disgrace me, you would not have guided me, and had you desired to expose me, you would not have covered me. This is the theology of tenderness, that even within hardship there is a mercy concealed, a hidden gesture of love. The supplicant who turns to God amidst difficulty is not only pleading for relief, but discovering how to read suffering in the language of trust. The Quran reassures the aching heart. In Surah Al-Sharh, the chapter of relief, 94th chapter of the Quran, verses 5 to 6. Indeed, with hardship there is ease. Indeed, with hardship there is ease. The repetition here in this verse, in this set of verses, is not redundant. It is deliberate. Two eases flank every hardship, but these are not always seen. They are felt by the one who persists in dua, even through tears. Again, Ibn Fahd al-Hilli in Uddat al-Dāʿī emphasizes this dynamic. He says, and perhaps in the delay or withholding of the response to supplication lies the benefit for the supplicant. For it may be a cause for multiplied reward, elevation of rank, and expiation of sins, yani removal of sins. And the supplication itself is an act of worship and a means of drawing near to God, the Exalted. The al-Bayt taught us that grief can either harden or soften the heart. The difference lies in where the sorrow turns. If it turns towards complaint against the divine, it leads to resentment. But if it turns towards dua, it becomes surrender. It becomes purification. In Nahj al-Balagha, in Hikmah number 82, Imam Ali says, surely patience is to faith what the head is to the body. There is no good in a body without a head, and there is no good in faith without patience. Dua is where patience breathes. It is the space where the soul can cry without collapsing, where it can express its wounds without severing its bonds to the healer. In the prophetic tradition, a hadith, even the tears of the righteous are counted as nearness. Consider the hadith, and this is again from the Sunnah and the Shia. Supplication is the weapon of the believer, the pillar of the religion, and the light of the heavens and the earth. It is a weapon, not to fight fate, but to fight despair, a sword against meaninglessness, a shield against the temptation to believe one is alone. Imam al-Kazim once said, how great is the aid that a believer finds in hardship through supplication. In this light, suffering is not erased by dua, it is elevated by it. The fire remains, but it refines rather than consumes. This is why Sayyid ibn Tawus in Iqbal al-Amal, he writes, and this is a paraphrase from multiple passages in Iqbal al-Amal, just for the sake of brevity. The servant who weeps to his Lord in the night has already been answered, not with solutions, but with nearness. For is there any pain greater than distance from God, and any healing greater than intimacy with Him? The supplicant learns through hardship that the true relief is not always the lifting of the burden, but the turning of the heart towards the one who holds it. This is why the one who prays through a trial is not defeated. They are already delivered, not necessarily from their suffering, but through it. Please give me a salawat and we can look at the contented soul in Quran and Hadith.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
So to be content, to be radi, is not to be complacent. It is to be in harmony with the divine current. It is to float in the river of decree or qada, without resisting its bends, knowing that the one who carved its path did so with wisdom and mercy. The Quran names this state an-nafs al-mutma'inna, the tranquil, contented soul. And we've quoted this verse earlier, but it's always nice to re-quote verses of Quran. And this one is from Surah Al-Fajr, the chapter of the dawn, 89th chapter of the Quran, verses 27 to 28. O tranquil soul, return to your Lord, pleased with Him and pleasing to Him. Now this address, again, many times it's recited and read at funerals, but it is not reserved for the dead. It is a living maqam, a living spiritual station. It is the destination of the one who walks the path of dua sincerely, asking, turning, surrendering until the soul is no longer revolting against divine will, but rather is at rest within it. Imam al-Sadiq, he says, and this is from Tafsir Ayyashi, under the tafsir of Surah Al-Fajr. The tranquil soul is the one that finds rest in the guardianship, wilaya of Ali and the Imams, peace and blessings be upon them. Rest is not found in worldly outcomes, but in alignment with the truth. And the way to align is through dua. Not because dua changes God's will, but because it changes us. Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him and his family, taught his companions to not just ask for provision, but to ask for contentment. And this is again a hadith where Rasulullah is saying, and it's a dua, "O God, make me content with what you have provided for me. Bless it for me and grant me goodness in all that is withheld from me." In another hadith, the Prophet explains the mark of a content soul. Successful is the one who submits and is given sufficiency, and whom God makes content with what he has given. True success, therefore, is not in abundance. It is in the soul that stops chasing more and starts thinking more. And from the treasure of Shia hadith, Imam al-Sadiq, he says, and this is from al-Kafi, whoever is content with what God has apportioned for him is the richest of people. Wealth here is not measured by gold, but by gratitude. The truly rich is the one whose heart does not hunger for what is not theirs. And again in Nahj Balagha, Imam Ali reminds, be more ascetic regarding what is in the hands of others, and you will be the richest of people. This perspective is cultivated in dua. Every time the hand is raised, the heart is reminded that provision is in his hands alone. And when that realization settles, the competition of the dunya loses its grip. Among the companions of the Imam, this state was known. It is narrated that Imam al-Kazim would say, whoever is not content with what God has allotted for him has accused God concerning his decree. This is the subtle danger. To be displeased with God's decree is to subconsciously question his justice, his knowledge, and even his love. But the one who supplicates often and listens inwardly comes to a different conclusion. Again, Ibn Fahd al-Hilli, he writes, the persistent supplicant is not the one who demands more. It is the one who learns to say, O Lord, I trust what you have chosen more than what I desire. This is contentment, not in opposition to dua, but as its natural outcome. And so the soul that continues to call, even when the door remains closed, even when the world says no, even when the pain remains, that soul is already answering the higher call to trust, to rest, and to return. Let us now look at what some of the senior scholars have said on contentment through dua. Because if the Quran and Hadith of the Prophets and Imams offer us the roots of this tree of contentment, then the scholars, the inheritors of their legacy, offer us its branches, leaves, and fruits. Through their insight, we come to understand that contentment, rida, is not the absence of struggle, but the presence of surrender, and that the heart's journey towards it is paved with the language of dua. So first of all, we have Imam Khomeini and dua as a spiritual reorientation. In his great book, Adab as-Salat, The Disciplines of Prayer, Imam Khomeini, may the blessings of God be upon him, reflects on the relationship between supplication and contentment. He says, true supplication is not the demand for personal wishes to be fulfilled. It is the reorientation of the soul to desire only what the beloved desires. The one who prays sincerely prays not for outcomes, but for alignment. And this is, I've paraphrased it from about 5 pages of Adab as-Salat, the Arabic edition. and you can read the English edition. It's available. And this is echoed in a statement that we are told Imam Khomeini used to say quite often. We supplicate to transform, not to bargain. In this light, the goal of dua is not control. It is transformation. One asks, and in the light of asking, the heart is trained. Gradually, it ceases to cling to results and begins to cling only to the nearness of God. Secondly, Allama Tabatabai, and contentment is the natural end of dhikr, of remembrance. Allama Tabatabai, may the blessings of God be upon him, in Tafsir al-Mizan, comments on the verse of Surah al-Ra'd, the chapter of thunder, 13th chapter of the Quran, verse number 28, which reads, "Surely in the remembrance of God do hearts find rest." He writes, "This tranquility, itminan, is the spiritual stillness granted to the heart that returns frequently to its source. When the heart turns to God through remembrance, through zikr, it is filled with assurance, and this assurance matures into contentment. It is the state of a soul no longer agitated by loss or elated by gain." Here, remembrance, dhikr, which is actually at the core of supplication of dua, becomes the spiritual therapy through which the soul is lifted from fragmentation into rest, from craving to surrender. We have another example from Sayyid ibn Tawus and the secret of the supplicant. Sayyid ibn Tawus in Iqbal al-Amal records his own spiritual reflections on the night of Qadr. And again, this is paraphrased, but you can refer to Iqbal al-Amal for detail. Then the write-up also has all the references. Sayyid ibn Tawus, he says, "I once raised my hands to the sky and my tongue froze. I could not speak, but my heart whispered, 'O Lord, I no longer ask that you give me what I want. Only let me want what you give.'" This is the distilled essence of rida. It is not abandoning desire. It is retraining it. He continues, "When the soul tastes contentment, it begins to weep, not because its dua was not accepted, but because it took so long to stop asking for the wrong things." And this is again a paraphrase from Sayyid ibn Tawus. The next one is Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Qadi Tabatabai and the stillness of the friend. Ayatollah Sayyid Qazi Tabatabai, who is the teacher and spiritual master of many scholars in Najaf, was known to say to his students, "You will not be able to taste true dua until your soul becomes silent in the face of God's decree." One of his disciples narrated, and this is within something called Risalat al-Suluk, which is, it's referenced in the write-up. So one of his disciples narrated, he would weep during dua, not from sorrow, but from longing. He would say, "The one who has tasted God's decree as sweet will not ask for it to be changed, only for the strength to receive it with dignity." This spiritual intimacy is the product of a heart that trusts so deeply that even pain no longer disturbs its peace, because the giver is always greater than the gift. Now, in this section, let us look at the practical insights from more modern, more contemporary scholars. Because even contemporary scholars echo this theme. Ayatollah Muhammad Taqi Bahjat, who was a mystic and a marja that I'm sure everyone has heard of, he is known to have said, "If we knew what is hidden for us in the unseen, we would choose nothing but what God chooses, God has chosen for us." And this is from Bahjat al-Arifin, and that's a compilation of his sayings and statements. The reference again is in the write-up. And Ayatollah Misbah Yazdi, may Allah rest his pure soul, taught, The essence of supplication is attention, tawajjuh, to the worshipped being. And it is considered spiritual ascension, يعني mi'raj, for the faithful. Supplication does not mean mere recitation of some words and observance of some acts. The essence or spirit of supplication is a person's soulful attention to the Lord and cherisher of the world, of the worlds rather. The extent of this attention is commensurate to the degree of one's ma'rifah or gnosis and love of God. As such, one must pay attention to the attributes of God before and during prayer. And this is from the famous book by Ayatollah Misbayazdi called In the Presence of the Beloved. And this is from part 1, the introduction and discussions about supplication. The book is available in English. So from the early Imams to contemporary ulama, the message is unified. Dua begins with a request, but ends with a transformation. Contentment is not disengagement, it is elevation. The mature supplicant does not stop asking, but asks differently. As Imam Ali, peace and blessings be upon him, said, and this is hikmah or saying number 46 from Nahj Balagha, we are content with what the all-compelling has apportioned to us. We possess knowledge, and our enemies possess wealth. This is the dignity of rida. The content soul walks through fire and remains at peace. Please give me a salawat and we continue.
اللهم
اللهم صل
صل على محمد وآل محمد.
So at the beginning of this path, we ask for things. At the end of it, we ask for nothing but Him. This is the journey of dua. Not merely as a practice of asking, but a sacred reorientation of the soul. It begins in need, but if persisted in with sincerity, it ends in contentment. Not because life becomes easier, but because the soul becomes deeper. We have seen how the Quran praises an-nafs al-mutma'inna, the tranquil soul, and how the Imams, peace and blessings be upon them, described contentment, rida, as the true wealth of the believer. We heard from the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him and his family, that success is not found in quantity, but in the serenity that comes from trusting the divine. We heard from Imam al-Sadiq that whoever is content with God, with what God has allotted to him, is the richest of people. And again from Imam al-Sadiq, whoever is not content with what God has given him has accused God concerning his decree. And so we return to the essence of this session. Dua is the furnace in which contentment is forged. Every time the hand is raised and the lips whisper, "O Lord," the heart is drawn into dialogue where something deeper is happening, a transformation not of fate, but of perception. Through dua, the believer learns that what is delayed is not denied, that what is withheld may be a mercy, that what is painful may be a gift dressed in thorns. And in that knowing, the soul is quieted. This is the destination of the sincere caller. Not the granting of every wish, but the dissolving of wishfulness. The supplicant who continues the path long enough no longer says, "Why me?" but begins to say, "You, O Lord, are enough." And in Quran, Surah Talaq, the chapter of divorce, 65th chapter of the Quran, verse number 3, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, "And whoever puts their trust in God, He is sufficient for them." In a world that constantly fuels desire and restlessness, dua invites the heart to sit down, breathe, and say, "I am content with God as my Lord." In the next session, inshallah, we will explore the final benefit in our list of benefits of supplication of dua, and that is how supplication allows the soul to witness the mercy of God, not just through gifts received, but through insight, awakening, and the subtle unveilings that take place in the quiet moments between prayer and response. Please give me a salawat and we can have the conclusion, inshallah.
اللهم صل على محمد
صلى
وآل
على محمد
محمد.
وآل محمد وعجل.
So in conclusion, the quiet power of contentment. So in this session, we have traced a path, not outward through events, but inward through the soul. We began by exploring how contentment, or rida, is not passivity, but a sacred fruit born from divine intimacy. The soul that turns to God again and again in dua finds itself softened, realigned, until it no longer clings to outcomes, but to the one who holds all outcomes in his hand. We then discovered that supplication and surrender are not in conflict. To supplicate is not to resist the divine will. It is to express trust in it. Dua is the voice of the heart that knocks, not to demand, but to belong. The mature believer learns to ask and let go, to hold both grief and gratitude in one breath. From there, we entered the realm of suffering and saw how dua reframes pain. Through the supplications of the Imams and the guidance of the Quran, we came to understand that affliction is not a sign of distance from God, but a deeper invitation to nearness. The tears of the supplicant are not wasted. They are pearls cast before the throne. They do not merely plead for rescue, they bear witness to the soul's return. We then saw how the Quran, the Prophet, and the Imams spoke of the content soul and nafs al-mutma'inna, not as an unreachable ideal, but as a living station. We explored how this soul walks through the world with calm certainty, not because it controls life, but because it trusts the one who does. Then finally, we heard from our scholars such as Imam Khomeini, Allama Tabatabai, Sayyid ibn Tawus, Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Qadi Tabatabai, each of whom echoed the same truth, that dua is not a spiritual bargaining chip, but a process of alignment. It trains the heart to stop asking, why wasn't I given what I wanted? But instead to whisper, make me want what you have given. In every section, one truth emerged clearly. Dua is not just how we ask, it is how we become. It is the mirror in which the soul sees its attachments, the compass by which it realigns its direction, and the furnace in which it is refined. The one who continues to supplicate, not only in joy or in despair, but with quiet trust, will one day discover that contentment was never found in the response, but in the act of supplicating itself. And so we close this session not with silence, but with a whisper, one that rises from beneath the throne. Oh my Lord, if you are pleased with me, then nothing else matters. So now we have a short supplication, which this week is entitled, The Supplication of the One Who Whispers Beneath the Throne. Please give me a salawat and we can have that and conclude.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل.
So in the name of the one who withholds and gives, the one who delays in mercy and answers in wisdom. O God, O the one whose decree is veiled in beauty, whose delays are not denials, whose silence is not absence, but an invitation to listen with the heart. I call upon you not to escape my burdens, but to meet them in your presence, not to bend your will to mine, but to bend my will until it rests in yours. You are my refuge when I am denied, and my portion when I am emptied. O Lord of Muhammad, the one whose chest bore the weight of revelation, and still bowed with contentment. O Lord of Ali, the one who on the night of Hijrah lay in the Prophet's bed, not for reward, but for love. The one who said, I am content with what you decree, even if my soul must bleed. O Lord of Fatima, the one who smiled with grief still in her lungs, and found solace in the unseen nearness of your pleasure. O Lord of Hassan and Hussein, the patient and the slain, the one who signed peace with courage, and the other who died with certainty, both content, both surrendered. O Lord of Ali Zayn al-Abidin, whose chains did not silence his praise, and who wept not for hardship, but for the distance between the servant and the beloved. O Lord of al-Baqir and al-Sadiq, whose supplications taught the tongue to say, if this is your will, then I submit, for in it lies your wisdom. O Lord of Musa al-Kadhim, who sang your name in the darkness of his cell, and whispered, if prison is from you, then it is paradise. O Lord of Ali al-Rida, the one who smiled on the road to Tus, and said, if my journey ends in your satisfaction, then let it end today. O Lord of Muhammad Jawad and Ali al-Hadi, whose trust in you never wavered, even as they stood alone in palaces of poison. O Lord of Hassan al-Askari, the watchful one, who taught us to prepare for the unseen. O Lord of the hidden one, the Mahdi, the son of Zahra, the one whose absence teaches us to wait, not in despair, but in submission. O the one for whom we pray, and who prays for us more. O remnant of God upon his earth, I long not only for your return, but to be worthy of standing in your shadow, content with what you carry, loyal to the truth you preserve. O God, teach me to ask without demanding, to bow without resisting, to weep without doubting, to walk without condition, to love you enough to say, if you are pleased with me, then let me be pleased with everything you choose. Make my dua a mirror, not a sword. Make it my refuge, not my complaint. Let it refine me until I no longer pray to be changed, but to be content. And when the time comes to return to you, let me be like those whom you describe. O tranquil soul, return to your Lord, pleased and pleasing. For what more could I ask than to return to you pleased, because you were always enough. Amen, O Lord, sustainer of the universes. Amen, O most merciful of the merciful. وآخر الدعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Please give me a salawat and we conclude.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Thank you, Brother Shahan.